Hello and welcome to another episode of TWiML Talk, the podcast where I interview interesting people doing interesting things in machine learning and artificial intelligence. I'm your host, Sam Charrington. I'd like to start out by thanking Siemens for sponsoring today's show. You probably know Siemens as a global leader in the area of industrial electrification, automation, and digitalization, or as a supplier of systems for power generation and transmission, as well as medical diagnosis. I recently had an opportunity to attend the company's Spotlight on Innovation event down in Orlando, Florida, and learn about some of the interesting work happening within the R&D branch of the company. I'm happy to be able to share a bit of that with you via today's conversation with Batu, a computer vision research manager there. To find out more about what Siemens is up to in areas like AI, digital twin, cybersecurity, smart city infrastructure, and more, visit twimlai.com/Siemens. All right, everyone, I've got Batu Arisoy on the show. Batu is a research manager for vision technologies and solutions at Siemens Corporate Technology. Batu, welcome to This Week in Machine Learning and AI.
Sure. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you on the show, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. Why don't we start with having you share a little bit about your background and how you came to work in computer vision and machine learning?
Sure. So actually, I started my education and career in the field of electrical and computer engineering with a focus on computer vision topics in Turkey. And after finishing up my Bachelor of Science there, I joined CMU and started working on computational geometry problems such as 3D reconstruction from point clouds and geometrical shape matching. And at that point, deep learning was taking off every day. And at that point, we were mostly using the traditional machine learning algorithms, and that's how my interest started. At that time, we were always using, can we extract some hand-carved features in order to represent the geometries? But then we realized that there might be a better way of doing this, and that's how I started this machine learning journey. After I received my PhD in computational geometry at CMU, I joined Siemens Corporate Technology, and I started integrating artificial intelligence and computational geometry together. And right now, I'm technology manager for Vision Technologies and Solutions team in Siemens Corporate Technology, which is actually R&D hub for Siemens. And we are providing high-quality research, development, and consulting services for our business units within the Siemens.
Okay, you mentioned that a big part of your focus is kind of merging, did I interpret this right? Kind of merging the traditional computational geometry approaches and deep learning? Is that how you're approaching the various problems you're working on?
That's correct. That's one facade of our approach. But basically, our team is known as the computer vision with limited data problem.
Okay.
So our team is working on how to solve computer vision problems by leveraging some simulation methods to generate synthetic data, or by developing intelligent AI algorithms to eliminate the need of large amount of training data set collection. Because you might be seeing in most of the domains that this is one of the obstacles to actually deploy AI systems in industry. You have to collect a large amount of training data sets for a specific custom task that's for your interest. But at the same time, after collecting this data, you also have to annotate this data. So we are working closely with academia and researchers within Siemens to tackle this problem from multiple angles. How to solve learning or computer vision with limited data problem.
Is your use of simulation primarily focused on synthetic data, or are you using simulation in other ways as well?
So we use simulation in two different ways. The first way of we use the simulation is actually to generate synthetic data. And one great example use case that we have developed in the past is about spare part recognition. This is a problem if you have a mechanical object that you deployed in the field and you need to perform maintenance and service operations on this mechanical functional object over time. In order to solve this problem, what we are working on is using simulation to synthetically generate a training data set for object recognition for large amount of entities. In other words, we synthetically generate images as if these images are collected in real world from an expert and they're annotated from an expert, and this actually comes for free using the simulation. We have developed a system together with our Siemens colleagues where we deployed this for the maintenance applications of the trains. And the main goal is a service engineer goes to the field, he takes his tablet, he takes the pictures, then he draws a rectangle box, and the system automatically identifies what is the object of interest that the service engineer would like to replace. And in order to make the system reliable, we have to take into consideration different lighting conditions, texture, colors, or whatever these parts can look like in a real world environment.
Okay, so you've got some ground truth data, which is the parts itself, from, these could be, I'm imagining you have them both from a like maybe catalog images perspective, but for some of them you probably have down to CAD description of these parts, and you want the service engineer to be able to take a picture of the parts in place, like not having, taking the part out and putting it on a white background or something like that, but just in place, and then draw a bounding box of some sort around it. And your system should be able to identify what the part in question is.
That's exactly the case. So we are interested for the built-in case. So we would like to eliminate the need of disassembling any mechanical object in order to identify the object of interest, because sometimes people might have already engraved some QR codes on these parts. However, we are targeting the application scenario where this object will take so much time to disassemble, or the QR code is not visible, or due to some customer preferences, we cannot print any QR code and ID tags on this part. Our system is designed to be able to work on such scenarios.
I can see how generating synthetic data, particularly your kind of typical data augmentation types of synthetic data where you're doing shifts and changing the lighting conditions and things like that, would help a model solve this problem. But you also have, I would imagine, the issue of kind of occlusion of your part is a big challenge to overcome. Is that dealt with via synthetic data or other methods?
So that's a great question, actually. Yes, so that was actually the first step that we took, was data augmentation methods to be able to actually use some previous catalog images or CAD models to generate synthetic images. However, the real challenge is modeling also the sensor structures. So what are these sensor noise that you are going to get when you are in the field? Because if you synthetically generate images, you don't consider the noise that comes from your acquisition device, or you don't consider the distortion that comes from your acquisition device or some other electromagnetic field effect. And this is where we published a paper in 2016 that's called Depth Synth, and where we modeled with very high detail how a depth sensor works, such that our simulator generates very high detailed depth images from the CAD model renderings. So that's what it makes it really successful. We are not only generating or augmenting data by creating its different scales, different rotations, but even we take into account the parameters that affects the image acquisition. And that way we're able to achieve success to deploy such a system in real world applications.
And so does the depth characteristic address the occlusion of your part by other parts in assembly, or
Yes.
How do those two factors tie together?
Sure. Actually, when we synthetically render these images, we render the entire assembly, so that even though we see the objects itself, we synthetically simulate as if there are occlusions from the neighboring parts. So our synthetic database does not only consist of clean images, we also take into account all these cases where you synthetically simulate these corner cases as well. So this is all baked into the simulation platform that we have.
I'm curious, with the depth synth paper, what the general approach was. Were how did you incorporate the characteristics of the sensor into the training of the models to get better results?
Sure. For example, in our paper, we talk about the representation of the depth synth pipeline, which consists of the projector modeling, camera modeling, object modeling, and reconstruction and post-processing modules. And each of these modules takes as input a CAD model and synthetically generates a rendering of a depth image corresponding to this CAD model. And during the projector modeling, for example, we simulate the patterns, motion between exposures, projector and lens effects. In the camera modeling, we take into account distortion, motion blur, and other noises that are coming from the environment. And in the object modeling, we take into account motion control, illumination, material properties, and also even the surface microgeometry modeling properties. And at the end of the day, we even apply how this geometry or how this image will look like if our device is applying some post-processing steps like the smoothing or hole filling. And that's how we actually get depth images that looks really realistic. And in our paper, we showed the comparison our simulation results with the real data acquisition. And we even simulate what if somebody is using a handheld device and he walks within the building. We take into account the vibration that comes from walking within the environment, or the motion between the exposures as well. And that's makes it really strong.
And so are the modules that you described, are these modules steps in a pipeline, or are they more like layers in a deep learning model?
So for this one, this is not based on the deep learning model,
Okay.
but right now this is still an end-to-end pipeline. But during that time, we actually modeled this mathematically, these behaviors.
Cool. So we dove right into a pretty detailed use case, but maybe before we talk about more use cases, I can have you take a step back and talk a little bit more broadly about what your group at Siemens does.
Sure. In our group, actually, every day we have three different type of interactions or activities. And in our group, as I mentioned before, we are targeting the computer vision with limited data problem. However, what are the different venues where we actually execute this work? And this can be grouped in under the three different project categories or activities. Our first activity involves day-to-day interaction with our business units, Siemens business units, to understand their needs and try to identify which computer vision research topics can make the largest business impact for them. After identifying such opportunities, we formulate proof of concept projects with them to improve their competitive advantage. But this is one type of the interaction that we have within the company for our scientists. The second type of interaction that also excites many of our scientists here is our interaction for more fundamental research topics. We are very actively engaged with subsidies and grants in USA. We screen potential call for proposal issued by US government entities that align with our long-term vision. And if there is anything relevant for us, we collaborate with multiple universities and industrial partners to draft white papers and full proposals. And a great example of such activity was right now we are one of the performers within DARPA Physics of AI project together with Cornell University. And we are also part of the DARPA Automatic Scientific Knowledge Extraction Project program as well. This actually concludes our second type of activities. And the third type of activities is more about how can our researchers and scientists work on the topics that are going to create a business impact in the next 2-3 years for Siemens. For these topics, our teams are collaborating with universities and other industry partners to innovate and publish research results in top conferences. For example, last year, our team had 3 CVPR1 ECCV publication and presentation. And this year we had 1 CVPR publication, and we also organized a computer vision with biased data workshop led by our principal scientist, Dr. Jan Ernst, and with our team member, Dr. Quan Chuan Peng, in Long Beach, California last week.
Okay. And what was your CVPR paper this time?
Sure. This time it was actually on a very, very interesting topic, what we called learning without memorizing. So this project is also is an important incremental learning is an important task aimed at increasing the capability of a trained model in terms of the number of classes recognizable by the model. So what it means is the key problem is the requirement of storing the training data associated with existing classes while teaching the classifier to learn new classes. And this is a work jointly done by Rajat Vikram Singh and Kwan Chuan Peng. And what they actually invented is they find out a way of emulating the relationship between a student and the teacher, how it works in real world, and they applied it to artificial intelligence. So the way the system works is there is one teacher model which tries to explain what it learned so far, but it doesn't want the student to just learn everything by heart. It wants the student to understand why he makes these decisions. And that way, if you're actually capable of teaching the neural network how a neural network makes decision, then you can actually pass the inherited information from the previous experiences without requiring access to the previous data sets.
Are there maybe correlations between the student-teacher type of an approach and something like an autoencoder where you're kind of trying to map what the primary model learns into some lower dimensional space and then kind of build that back out?
Yes, it's similar because actually this work is built upon one of our previous publications, which was trying to do attention modeling, and attention modeling is actually trying to understand where does our neural network pay most of the attention when it makes a decision. And we are capable of highlighting, oh, okay, these are the set of the pixels that contributes to the most of the decision. And this is the paper that we published last year. It's called the Tell Me Where to Look. And in this paper, by leveraging this powerful explanation mechanism, we were able to encapsulate knowledge that's very unique from the training data set in a lower dimensional representation state. And that's how it works, actually. That's why it's also relevant to the autoencoder, but we are using another mechanism to actually encapsulate the knowledge coming from the training data sets.
Okay. And so how does that mechanism work in the learning without memorizing paper?
Sure. The way this works is actually, first of all, what's the real use case? The real use case is you might be familiar with all these edge devices where we are capable of performing real-time computer vision tasks on them. Mm-hmm. And if you would like to improve your model, for example, you would like to train or teach this model classification or recognition of the new objects, you don't want to retrain your system using the previous training data set first. It takes too much time again. Second, you might be not have a connectivity, or you might not have access to this data. And there's also memory limitations on your edge device, which prevents you to actually store this data on your device for further training purposes. So the main idea is, can we encapsulate the knowledge that was already inherited from a previous training stage and pass it to the next stage of the training? And the way the algorithm works is it tries to memorize. Actually, we call it learning without memorization, but it tries to always consistently pay attention to the same regions of the image pixels to make the decision. So it doesn't allow its attention mechanism to divert too much by looking at the new observed data. So that way, by keeping our attention consistent, we are preventing our attention to be hurt or disturbed. And by preventing that, we are capable of actually maintaining the data as much as possible. Of course, this is something at research stage, and we are working on it further for more industrial use cases.
Going back to the Tell Me Where to Look paper, what's the key innovation there?
So the key innovation there was a very interesting paper because I don't know if you are familiar with the attention modeling frameworks, but what they are trying to do is the famous example is you like to recognize a ship, And in your training data set, you always have the ships that are on the sea. Then you like to say, okay, show me what are the pixels that my neural network is paying attention. And you realize that, oh, my neural network is paying attention to the sea because it's actually learning the patterns of the sea instead of the geometrical features of a ship.
Mm-hmm.
So, and existing algorithms until our development, the attention models were not extracting the boundaries of the object of interest. They were more noisy compared to our recent development. What we did that work was we demonstrated that we can actually mask or hide some pixels of the objects or some pixels of the image, and then we send back this information, this masked or altered image, back to the classifier until it's not capable of recognizing it any of the correct classes. That way, in an iterative fashion, we remove more pixels from the images until our classifier starts failing to making the right decision. And at that moment, say that, okay, we are successfully recovered all the set of pixels, which impacts the decision of making this is a cat, this is a ship, or etc. This is the one branch of our work. The second branch of work
and so if I
was,
can jump
okay,
in there, or the masking is done as part of the process. It's not like a labeling type of a step. Is that correct?
That's correct. It was completely trained end to end, where the system optimizes jointly, trying to identify where to pay attention pixels, and at the same time remove some pixels to see if it needs to grow these pixels over time. And this way, it actually corrects and improves its attention mechanism. And we realized that we were able to get much more accurate boundaries of the attention, and they were much more clustered together such that they are more compact representation of the knowledge. And it also provides explainability aspect.
Okay. And I think at least some folks in our audience will be familiar with the LIME paper, which is Carlos Gestrin and his folks from the University of Washington. And they do something similar where they kind of perturb aspects of the input to determine which are the pixels that are most relevant to the classifier decision. Can you relate this work to that?
Sure. From a higher level, we are trying to solve a similar problem, but I don't know the exact details of that paper, so that's why I won't be comfortable to directly compare them to here.
Cool. And then you mentioned a computer vision with bias data workshop that you did at CVPR this year. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and actually this was the second series of this workshop organized by our principal scientist, Jan Ernst. And actually the main objective of this workshop was bringing together people from industry, academia, and also students as well to identify what are the big problems right now in the computer vision with limited and biased data. And one famous example is like if you have a training database, you always have a class imbalance problem. You always have so many data points of the nice results, but you don't have enough number of samples of the negative samples or the problematic cases or out of distribution cases or the unique rare cases.
Mm-hmm.
So we had the list of speakers, and you can also find it online, the list of speakers from the website, CVPR 2019 workshop website. And we discussed together what are some common problems that the academia and industry is facing right now, and what are some approaches that academia and industry tried so far to tackle this problem. That was the main objective of the workshop.
Now, these kind of class imbalance problems that you've described, they come up all over the place, but they are particularly present in what I imagine are pretty common use cases for you at Siemens, like industrial inspection, where you're trying to identify damaged parts or damaged products coming off of an inspection line, or maybe looking for damage on wind turbine rotors, things like that. Like you've got so many pictures of the the good parts, and very few pictures of the different types of damaged parts. What are some of the key ways that you're able to deal with this?
Sure. Actually, some people call this problem out of distribution learning. Some people call it novelty detection or anomaly detection as well. And yes, you're right, because it's always easy to say, okay, this is something normal looking versus this is something defective, but there might be 100 different ways this defect might look like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and if you would like to try to annotate all this together, it might take too much time and you might not even able to cover entire problem space. So for this one, we are working some anomaly detection algorithms in order to learn representations, similar approaches what you mentioned previously using autoencoders, such that you learn visual trends and then being able to identify, okay, if this is how a normal scene looks like, how can we identify this sample does not fit to this distribution, the data that we learned from, and that's labeled as the normal. And this is a very, very powerful technology if you can scale it different use cases as well.
So what are some of the most interesting, either use cases or case studies that you've had a chance to work on at Siemens? What's most exciting of the various applications of computer vision there?
Sure. And actually, this is a very hot area, the computer vision, and we always try to do research that's grounded to the industrial needs and business needs. And we usually take approaches together with government as well. And we are one of the performers in one of the programs by Office of Naval Research, and this is called the Activity Recognition Project. Where we are trying to develop a system, the user will interact with an AI system where the user will tell, okay, I'm looking for an object, and the user will be able to define this object. Okay, it's going to have red shirt. It's going to have blonde hair. Or it's going to say short, tall, these attributes, or I'm looking for a white car, or etc. Then the system automatically filters out or distills millions of video images or millions of the videos in order to identify and locate your object of interest that you defined. But the nice thing and interesting thing is this is a problem that's actually two-way where we believe, and this is very exciting, we call this human in the loop idea. So what we believe is you or the user can provide all this information to the system, but we don't want AI system to just return, okay, these are the results. We want AI system to come back and counter back saying that, did you mean by this? And such that they are going to have a conversation between the user and the AI system until they actually filter out and locate the object of interest. Because sometimes we also observe that people are not good at it by describing what they're looking for, and the system might be able to correct it saying that, did you mean by that this? And we are trying to actually map human input to the visual search queries and having a conversation between these two agents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm envisioning a lot of moving parts here between the natural language elements of it and the visual querying and the choosing the right examples to maximize information transfer between the humans and the computer. What are the different elements of solving a problem like that?
Sure. And actually, that's what makes Siemens really unique, because Siemens Corporate Technology is a research R&D hub for Siemens, and we are actively investing in research and development in the domain of artificial intelligence, and there are multiple teams contributing all over the world with diverse backgrounds. And as you have seen here, this problem requires a natural language processing background. This requires computer vision background. This problem requires also the as person identification or this kind of application backgrounds. So that's why the main team consists of multiple subgroups. And one of the team is focusing on identifying attributes from multi-camera streams, so that actually you need to still train the systems on some training data sets, such that you can learn, okay, what does it mean really having a red car? What does it mean really having a blue car? So the first part of the computer vision element is being able to identify the objects and then being able to identify the features of these objects. Afterwards, after you identify this, and you are capable of actually now processing the human input, where the user says, I'm looking for, after you see that sentence, you look for the verbs and the nouns. And our natural language processing experts are working on how to relate the user queries to the mathematical queries in order to actually find the objects of interest that are found by this computer vision modules. Afterwards, of course, there's another team, which is the user interaction team, which is focusing on, okay, what is the information exchange efficiency? So are we actually going to be able to find a solution if we go down to this route, or should the system come back and ask the user, oh, did you mean by this, or such that it actually improve the quality of the search results?
And along the lines of kind of government projects, you mentioned earlier a DARPA Physics of AI project, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. What's that project about?
So DARPA Physics of AI is a program where multiple university partners are contributing. And we have our team member, Dr. Chun Chang is the PI for that project. And this project is actually trying to incorporate physics into the artificial intelligence systems in order to eliminate the need of large training data sets. And as I explained at the beginning of my discussion, so this is really what excites us, learning with limited data. And whenever there is such a program, we try our best to be part of it. And here we are working with the Cornell University. And actually, this project is trying to reconstruct 3D images from subsampled resolution sensor data, where they know some physics constraints, but they don't have the full visibility to the data for reconstruction, and they are focusing on how to incorporate the physics in order to be able to reconstruct 3D by knowing the relationship within the elements in this data and etc.
Okay. Yeah, I find this general direction of research to be really interesting. In that, we're kind of coming from a history of, building systems based on, very robust models of the physical world. And then the pendulum kind of swung to, let's throw away all the physics and just use statistical models, from, just building up from data. And, I find that there's a lot of interesting work happening in the middle now. Kind of the pendulum's kind of swung into the middle, where we're trying to integrate these two and attach the physical knowledge of the world, or the way whatever system that we're modeling works, with the statistical information or statistical modeling techniques. There are a bunch of really interesting applications there.
Yes, and actually one everyday example that I use is like, you don't need to observe 1,000 times a car is driving on the road in order to understand a regular car does not fly. So if we can integrate some knowledge about, okay, there's gravity, there are roads and etc. You won't need that much data. That's something that excites us, and we definitely interested in this type of topics.
I was at the Siemens Spotlight on Innovation event not too long ago, and one of the use cases or application areas that I saw Siemens talking quite a bit about was smart cities, and a lot of kind of a much broader array of applications than I usually see when smart cities comes up. Is that an area that your group works in?
Not at the moment, but we believe the technology that we develop can be applied there as well.
You also mentioned a project automating scientific knowledge extraction. What's that one about?
Sure. That's a project that we are collaborating with our sister group here in Siemens CT. And actually, that's the PI is the Dr. Yanis. And actually, what we are trying to in that project is it's another DARPA effort. And the objective is if you have list of papers, how can you make sure that the knowledge that extracted from these papers corresponds to the code that you actually get delivered at the end of the day? Or how can you make sure that you can automatically understand what is actually explained in this paper by looking at the images, the text, and making its relationship to the software. And our team is contributing to the recognition of and decomposition of the neural network images on these papers. And these papers are mostly scientific papers where you have the multiple layers. And actually, we are working on developing a system that's capable of taking as input such a scientific paper and then process the images on these papers and tell you, okay, this paper is leveraging a neural network architecture X with this many layers, and they are using this dropout and this pooling layer and etc. So we are working on that component to be able to automatically screen such scientific knowledge papers and try to summarize the content and knowledge in them.
My sense is that a lot of people who are listening to this podcast will probably be really interested in a system like that, particularly with all of the papers that are that come out in our space and that are published to archive. It's super difficult to keep up with, even a subset of those papers.
Yes, that's true. But of course, now we are at the research stage of this algorithm. In the future, we are going to see hopefully more and more example of such work. Because right now, if I remember correctly, in CVPR, there were 9,300 attendees and over 1,000 different papers. And right now, if you spend 3 or 4 days, it really takes too much time to even figure out what are the papers that you would like to attend and visit. So such a solution would be even good if it can actually screen what are the titles and then does it really fit my interest, and then I can go there.
It's kind of towards the basic research side of the spectrum, at least relative to what some other corporate research arms are doing. How do you ensure that this stuff is tied into and aligned with the actual stuff that Siemens is doing? And, for that matter, how important, you've mentioned that that's important to you, but, how do you strike a balance between contributing in these broader efforts and collaborations and doing things that ultimately has an impact on the kind of stuff that Siemens cares about?
Sure. And actually, with government and also other research projects, we are more tackling the lower TRL projects, which means the lower technology readiness levels, where we develop some proof of concept and we publish some papers. Of course, we secure the IP. And that's the one of the important metrics for us, how many new ideas or IPs can be actually contribute to our CMOS business units to increase their competitive advantages. From a grounding perspective, any topic that we invest, we always first think about, does it really relate to a problem that we have in-house, or does it really have some potential to be converted into a product in the future? And that's always our grounding mechanism. And our team is working all these papers that we publish, even though they sound on their cool research projects, they all get into the real world. It's as one component of a product that you experience in the world. And actually, the spare part recognition algorithm that I discussed at the beginning of our interview, that's actually called Easy Spare Idea. If you go online and Google it, you can see it. That's actually a product that our business units right now actually leveraging and providing this service. So that's how the technology transition happens. First, we actually perform the research internally and in collaboration with the academicians. And then our job is transferring this research to relevant products. But we always keep in mind that whatever we do needs to provide some impact, hopefully, in the next 2 years for Siemens overall.
When you're taking an idea like this at the later stages of this process, like the easy spares, are there unique challenges that you run into kind of in those final steps of commercialization?
Always. And that's why we always have support from other experts from our business units who are really know how to productize something. And we definitely experience some challenges. Like one of the challenges is with the neural networks, the memory or the processing times. So we experience such challenges during at the end of the proof of concept phase before demonstrating it to our business units.
Well, Batu, thank you so much for taking the time to share a bit of what you're up to. Sounds like a lot of really interesting stuff. And I'm imagining that some folks will be interested in digging into some of the recent CVPR papers that you'll be sharing with us.
Yes, thank you very much for your time as well. And I would like to also point out that in case if there are any other additional questions, your audience is free to reach me out. And I think you can also post my email, your website, so that I would be happy to connect with them afterwards.
We'll include it in the show notes. Thanks, Batu.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, that's our show for today. For more information on today's guest, visit TWIMLai.com/shows. Thanks again to Siemens for sponsoring today's episode. Be sure to check them out at TWIMLai.com/Siemens. As always, thanks so much for listening, and catch you next time.